The rain had been falling since dawn, turning Chicago's streets into rivers of gray slush and making everything harder than it already was. Elias Moreno pulled his coat tighter around his daughter's sleeping form as he hurried through the crowded bus terminal, his worn sneakers squeaking against the wet linoleum. Luna's small body was warm against his chest, her breathing soft and steady despite the chaos around them. At 6 years old, she had learned to sleep through almost anything, a skill born of necessity in their small apartment above the laundromat where sirens and honking horns were the city's lullaby. His phone buzzed with another text from Andre Reyes, the contractor in Indianapolis who had agreed to interview him for a foreman position. "Looking forward to meeting you at 2 p.m. This could be exactly what you're looking for." Elias's chest tightened. This job could change everything. Steady pay, health insurance, a chance to use his carpentry skills again, instead of piecing together part-time shifts at the diner and the warehouse. But first, he had to get there. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The terminal was packed with the usual mix of travelers, college students heading home, elderly couples clutching each other's arms, business travelers tapping impatiently at their phones. Elias approached the ticket counter, shifting Luna's weight carefully. She stirred but didn't wake, her small hand fisting in his jacket. "Indianapolis, please," he said to the clerk, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes. "The 8:30 departure." She handed him a ticket without looking up, already focused on the next customer in line. Elias glanced at it quickly. The numbers looked right, and hurried toward the boarding area. The announcement crackled overhead. "Now boarding bus 447 to Fort Wayne with continuing service." The rest was lost in static and the din of voices. Fort Wayne, that didn't sound right, but buses made multiple stops, didn't they? Elias's exhaustion clouded his thinking. He'd been awake since 4 a.m., getting Luna ready to stay with Mrs. Rodriguez downstairs, then rushing across the city on 3 different trains to make it here on time. The details blurred together like watercolors in the rain. At the gate, he handed over his ticket to a driver who barely glanced at it before waving him aboard. The man was focused on his coffee and his clipboard, raindrops still beating on his uniform. "Find any empty seat," he mumbled. Elias climbed the steep steps, Luna's head heavy on his shoulder. The bus was only half full, which surprised him for a weekday morning. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a pale, clinical glow. He made his way down the aisle, looking for 2 seats together where Luna could stretch out when she woke up. That's when he saw her. The woman sat alone near a window, her dark hair pulled back severely, wearing an expensive-looking black coat that seemed to absorb the light around it. She had claimed the entire row with her presence, her leather bag positioned strategically on the aisle seat, her body turned toward the window in a way that clearly said, "Do not disturb." She was maybe 35, with the kind of sharp, controlled beauty that suggested she was used to getting her way. Elias hesitated. The bus was filling up behind him, and Luna was getting heavier in his arms. There were other seats, but none that would give Luna room to lie down properly. He approached carefully. "Excuse me," he said softly, trying not to wake his daughter. "Would it be all right if we sat here? She's been sick, and she might need to stretch out." The woman turned from the window, and Elias caught his breath. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and turbulent, with a depth that suggested intelligence and something else, pain, maybe, or exhaustion that went bone deep. She looked at him, then at Luna, then back at him. For a moment, her expression was unreadable. "I suppose," she said finally, moving her bag with sharp, economical movements. Her voice was cultured, with the kind of precise diction that spoke of expensive schools and boardroom meetings. She pressed herself closer to the window, creating as much distance as possible between them. "Thank you," Elias said, settling into the aisle seat carefully. Luna made a small sound and burrowed deeper against his chest. He could feel the woman's eyes on them, assessing, judging, maybe. He wondered what she saw. A young father in a second-hand jacket, work boots that had seen better days, a child who needed a haircut. They probably looked exactly like what they were, people who rode buses because they couldn't afford anything else. The driver climbed aboard, did a quick head count, and pulled away from the terminal. Through the rain-streaked windows, Chicago began to slide past, familiar neighborhoods giving way to industrial areas, then suburbs, then open highway. Elias checked his watch. 8:45 a.m. He'd make it to Indianapolis with time to spare, maybe even grab a cup of coffee and collect himself before the interview. Luna shifted in his sleep, her small hand reaching out automatically for comfort. Without thinking, Elias caught it in his own, their fingers intertwining. It was such a natural gesture, so full of unconscious love, that for a moment the woman beside him forgot to look away. She watched their joined hands, something flickering across her face too quick to read. The bus hummed along the highway, windshield wipers keeping steady rhythm against the rain. Other passengers dozed or stared at phones, but the silence in their row felt different, charged somehow, full of unspoken questions. Elias found himself stealing glances at his seatmate, wondering what had put that guarded look in her eyes, what had made her choose a bus instead of whatever luxury she could clearly afford. She was beautiful in a way that suggested she'd forgotten how to be anything else. Sharp cheekbones, perfectly applied lipstick that somehow hadn't smudged despite the rain, clothes that probably cost more than Elias made in a month. But there was something lonely about her beauty, something that made Elias think of Luna's drawings of princesses trapped in towers of their own making. A road sign flashed past. Fort Wayne, 127 miles. Elias's stomach dropped. Fort Wayne wasn't Indianapolis. Fort Wayne wasn't even close to Indianapolis. He pulled out his phone, trying to map the distance without waking Luna, and felt his world tilt sideways. He was on the wrong bus heading in the wrong direction, and there was nothing he could do about it until they reached the next stop. The interview. The job. The chance to finally catch a break. All of it slipping away as surely as the miles rolling past his window. Beside him, the woman noticed his sudden stillness, the way his breathing had changed. She didn't say anything, but her reflection in the window was watching him now, her storm-gray eyes reflecting something that might have been recognition, as if she too knew what it felt like to be on the wrong road with no way to turn back. The bus carried them forward into the gray morning, two strangers bound together by chance and circumstance, neither knowing that this mistake would be the beginning of everything they hadn't dared to hope for. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, rain drumming against the windows in a rhythm that seemed to match Elias's racing thoughts. He stared at his phone screen, trying to will the GPS to show him something different, but the truth remained stark and unchangeable. Indianapolis was 3 hours in the opposite direction. The interview he'd been counting on, the job that could have changed everything for Luna and him, was slipping away with each passing mile. Luna stirred against his chest, her small face scrunched up in the way that usually meant she was about to wake up cranky. Her asthma had been acting up again last week, keeping both of them awake most nights, and she needed all the rest she could get. Elias pressed his lips to the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo mixed with the lingering smell of the inhaler she'd needed that morning. "Daddy?" Luna's voice was small and confused as she lifted her head to look around. "Where are we?" "We're on an adventure, sweetheart," Elias said softly, the lie coming easier than he'd expected. "Remember how I told you sometimes the best things happen when you're not looking for them?" Luna considered this seriously, as she did most things. At 6, she had an old soul that sometimes broke Elias's heart. She'd been through too much for someone so small, losing her mother when she was barely 4, watching her father work multiple jobs just to keep them afloat, learning to be quiet when the bills piled up on the kitchen counter and Daddy got that look in his eyes. "Is the pretty lady part of our adventure?" Luna whispered, glancing at the woman beside them. Elias felt heat rise to his cheeks. The woman, he still didn't know her name, had been pointedly ignoring them for the past hour, her attention fixed on her phone or the window or anywhere that wasn't their direction. But now she glanced over, catching Luna's curious stare. "I'm not really part of anything," the woman said, her voice carefully neutral, but something in her expression softened slightly when she looked at Luna. "I'm just trying to get somewhere too." Luna nodded solemnly. "Daddy and me were supposed to go to Indianapolis, but we got on the wrong bus. Daddy says sometimes wrong turns lead to right places, but I think he's trying not to be sad about his important meeting." "Luna," Elias said gently, embarrassed by his daughter's honesty, "the lady doesn't need to hear about our problems." But the woman was still looking at Luna with something like fascination, as if she'd never seen a child speak so frankly before. Indianapolis is a long way from here, she said carefully. Yeah, Luna sighed, settling back against her father's chest. But Daddy says we'll figure it out. He's really good at figuring things out, even when they're broken. The woman's eyes flicked to Elias's face, and for a moment their gazes met and held. There was something in her storm-gray eyes that he couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. As if Luna's simple faith in him had shifted something in how she saw them both. Would you like to draw? Elias asked Luna, reaching into the worn backpack at his feet. I packed your coloring book and the good crayons. Luna perked up immediately. Drawing was her favorite thing in the world. Her way of making sense of everything that didn't fit properly into her 6-year-old understanding. Elias spread the coloring book across his lap, and Luna selected a purple crayon with the kind of careful consideration she usually reserved for very important decisions. I'm going to draw a castle, she announced. For the pretty lady, she looks like she needs one. The woman, who had been trying to ignore them again, looked up sharply. I don't need a castle. Everyone needs a castle, Luna said matter-of-factly, beginning to color with intense concentration. That's where you go when the world gets too noisy. Daddy says Mommy lives in a castle now, in the sky, where her heart doesn't hurt anymore. Elias's breath caught. Luna rarely talked about her mother so directly, and never to strangers. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it had evolved into something Luna could carry, a sadness that lived alongside her joy rather than consuming it. The woman's expression shifted again, that careful mask slipping just a fraction. Your mommy! She died when I was little, Luna said without looking up from her drawing. It makes Daddy sad sometimes, but he doesn't think I know. I know lots of things adults think I don't know. The silence that followed felt heavy with unsaid things. Elias wanted to apologize, to explain, to somehow make this less awkward, but the words wouldn't come. The woman was staring at Luna's drawing now, a purple castle with too many windows, and a flag that looked more like a flower. Why does the castle need so many windows? The woman asked quietly. Luna paused in her coloring, considering the question seriously. So the queen inside can see everything that's happening outside. Sometimes queens get lonely in their castles, so they need to remember there's a whole world out there, even if they can't touch it. Something flickered across the woman's face. Pain, maybe, or recognition so sharp it was almost physical. She pressed her lips together, turning back toward the window, but not before Elias caught the shine of unshed tears in her eyes. That's very thoughtful, she said finally, her voice carefully controlled again. Luna beamed at the praise, then carefully tore the drawing from her book. Here, she said, holding it out to the woman. For your castle. You can put it on your refrigerator if you want. The woman stared at the offered drawing as if it were something dangerous, something that might explode if she touched it. When she finally took it, her fingers were careful not to brush against Luna's, but she held the paper gently, studying the purple lines and the crooked flag flower. Thank you, she said softly. I don't usually receive gifts from strangers. We're not strangers, Luna said with the kind of logic that only made sense to children. We're adventure companions. Right, Daddy? Elias looked at his daughter's expectant face, then at the woman holding her drawing like it was made of spun glass, and something loosened in his chest. Maybe this wasn't the disaster he'd thought it was. Maybe sometimes wrong turns really did lead to right places. Right, he said softly, adventure companions. The woman folded the drawing carefully and slipped it into her expensive leather bag. When she looked up again, her storm-gray eyes were clearer somehow, as if Luna's simple offering had washed away some of the shadows there. I'm Vivienne, she said suddenly, as if the words had surprised her. Elias, he replied, and this is Luna, obviously. Obviously, Vivienne repeated, and for the first time since they'd sat down, she almost smiled. Outside, the rain was starting to let up, and shafts of pale sunlight were breaking through the clouds. The bus rolled on toward whatever destination awaited them, carrying 2 adults who were learning to see each other, and 1 small girl who had already decided that sometimes the best adventures started with getting lost. 2 hours into their unintended journey, the landscape outside had shifted from urban sprawl to rolling farmland dotted with bare trees and the occasional red barn. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming in the pale autumn sunlight. Luna had finished 3 more drawings. A superhero that looked suspiciously like Elias, a family of birds building a nest, and something she called the happy bus, before finally falling asleep again, curled up across both seats with her head in her father's lap. Vivienne had been watching them both with increasing fascination, though she tried to be subtle about it. There was something about the way Elias touched his daughter, so gentle, so instinctively protective, that made her chest ache with an emotion she couldn't quite name. When Luna had reached for him in her sleep, his hand had moved to stroke her hair without conscious thought, a gesture so full of unconscious love that Vivienne had to look away. She wasn't used to being around children, and she certainly wasn't used to the kind of easy affection that seemed to flow between this father and daughter like breathing. In her world, relationships were transactions, carefully negotiated and mutually beneficial. Love, if it existed at all, came with contracts and prenups and exit strategies. "She's beautiful," Vivienne found herself saying, surprising them both. "Your daughter." Elias looked down at Luna's sleeping face, his expression soft with pride and worry in equal measure. "She's everything good I've ever done," he said quietly. "Everything else, sometimes I feel like I'm just stumbling through, hoping I don't mess it up too badly. You don't strike me as someone who messes things up." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You should see my bank account, or my employment record for the past 2 years, or the way I just got on the wrong bus and ruined the best job opportunity I've had in months." Vivienne felt something twist in her chest. "The interview in Indianapolis? Construction foreman position. Good pay, benefits, regular hours. The kind of job that would let me be home for dinner with Luna instead of working 3 different part-time shifts." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that spoke of bone-deep exhaustion. "Andre, the guy who was going to interview me, he took a chance on me based on a recommendation from someone who knew my work before everything changed. Before your wife died." The words hung in the air between them. Elias stilled, his hand frozen mid-stroke through Luna's hair. "Luna told you?" "She's very honest for a 6-year-old. She gets that from her mother." His voice was soft, distant. "Maria never met a truth she wouldn't tell, even when it would have been easier to lie, especially then." Vivienne waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. In her business life, silence was a negotiating tactic, a way to make the other person uncomfortable enough to fill the void with information. But this felt different, like offering space instead of applying pressure. "She had a heart condition we didn't know about," Elias continued, his voice so quiet Vivienne had to lean forward to hear him. "Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. She was cooking dinner one evening, singing along to some song on the radio, and then she just stopped. Luna was playing with blocks on the kitchen floor, and I was in the garage working on a project. By the time I found them, it was too late." "I'm sorry," Vivienne said, the words feeling inadequate even as she spoke them. The worst part wasn't losing her, as terrible as that was. The worst part was watching Luna look for her mother for weeks afterward, checking all her favorite spots, asking when Mommy was coming home from her trip. I didn't know how to explain that some trips don't have return tickets. Vivienne's throat felt tight. She'd built an empire on her ability to compartmentalize emotion, to think strategically even in crisis, but something about Elias's quiet grief was dismantling her defenses piece by piece. "How do you do it?" she asked. "How do you keep going when everything falls apart?" Elias glanced at her, as if hearing something in her voice that made him look at her differently. "You just do," he said simply. "Because giving up isn't an option when someone needs you. Luna needs me to figure it out, so I figure it out. Some days I'm better at it than others." "And today?" He smiled ruefully. "Today I got on the wrong bus and missed the interview that could have changed our lives, so today's not one of my better days." Vivienne was quiet for a long moment, studying his profile as he gazed out the window. There was strength in his face, but not the hard, aggressive kind she was used to seeing in boardrooms. This was different, a quiet resilience, like a tree that bent with the storm but never broke. "What would you do?" she asked suddenly. "If you could have any job in the world, what would it be?" "Build things," he said without hesitation. "Beautiful things that last. Custom furniture, maybe, or restoration work on old houses. I used to be good at that. Taking something broken and making it whole again." He looked down at Luna, his expression tender. "I want her to grow up in a house I built with my own hands, you know? Something solid, something permanent. Somewhere she never has to worry about whether the rent's paid, or if we'll have to move again." There was such longing in his voice, such quiet hope, that Vivienne felt something crack open in her chest. When was the last time she'd wanted something that wasn't about profit margins or market share? When had she stopped dreaming of building something that mattered? "What about you?" Elias asked, turning the question back to her. "What do you do?" Vivienne hesitated. She'd been incognito for a reason, trying to escape the weight of her identity for just a few hours, to be anonymous in a way she hadn't been since her company went public. But something about Elias's honesty made her want to offer truth in return. "I run a company," she said carefully. "Technology sector. We develop software solutions for environmental sustainability." It was the sanitized version, the elevator pitch, that revealed nothing meaningful. Elias nodded politely, the way people did when they didn't understand but were too polite to ask for clarification. "That sounds important," he said. "It should be," Vivienne replied, surprising herself with the admission. "But most days it just feels like moving numbers around, making shareholders happy, attending meetings about meetings. I can't remember the last time I built something real." Space Solu. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the bus humming along the highway toward their unknown destination. Luna shifted in her sleep, murmuring something inaudible, and Elias automatically adjusted his position so she'd be more comfortable. The gesture was so natural, so selfless, that it made Vivienne's chest ache again. "Can I ask you something?" Elias said eventually. "Sure." "Why are you on this bus? I mean, no offense, but you don't exactly look like the Greyhound type." Vivienne almost smiled at that. "I was supposed to give a keynote speech at an environmental summit in Fort Wayne. 2,000 people expecting me to tell them how to save the world while maximizing profits." She paused, remembering the moment that morning when she'd looked at herself in the hotel mirror and realized she couldn't remember why any of it mattered. "I couldn't do it. Not today, so I bought a ticket and got on the first bus heading anywhere else." "Running away?" Taking a detour, she corrected, then considered. "Okay, running away. Sometimes running away is just another way of running toward something," Elias said gently. "Maybe you're exactly where you're supposed to be." As if to underscore his point, Luna stirred and opened her eyes, blinking up at them both with the sleepy confusion of a child waking in an unfamiliar place. "Are we there yet?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "Not yet, sweetheart," Elias said, smoothing her hair, "but we're getting somewhere." Vivienne looked at this father and daughter, at their easy intimacy and quiet resilience, and felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been locked away for so long she'd forgotten it existed. Hope, maybe, or just the possibility that not all wrong turns led to dead ends. Outside the window, a road sign flashed past. Fort Wayne, 47 miles. Whatever awaited them there, they would face it together, three strangers who had become something more without quite knowing how. The bus pulled into a rest stop just outside Muncie, Indiana, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Most passengers shuffled off to stretch their legs and grab coffee from the convenience store, but Vivienne remained in her seat, staring at her phone with an expression Elias couldn't quite read. Luna had woken up fully now, chattering about the cows they'd passed and asking if they could get chocolate milk at the store. "Can we, Daddy? Please?" "I promise I'll drink all of it." Elias smiled at her earnest expression. "We'll see, sweetheart. Let me check how much money we have, okay?" As he reached for his wallet, Vivienne's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The name Miriam appeared on the screen, along with a photo of an older black woman with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun. Vivienne stared at the phone for 3 rings before declining the call, but not before Elias caught a glimpse of something vulnerable flickering across her face. "Someone important?" he asked gently. "My former nanny," Vivienne said, her voice carefully neutral. "She raised me after my parents died. She's persistent." The phone buzzed again immediately, this time with a voicemail notification. Vivienne closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering strength, then played the message on speaker, either forgetting Elias was there or simply not caring anymore. Vivienne Marie Hale. The voice was warm but firm, with the kind of authority that came from years of loving someone enough to call them on their nonsense. "I know you're ignoring my calls, and I know you skipped that summit today. The whole environmental community is buzzing about your mysterious disappearance. But, honey, running away from your responsibilities won't fix what's broken inside you." Elias saw Vivienne's jaw tighten, her fingers gripping the phone a little too hard. You keep running from life, thinking if you move fast enough, work hard enough, build your walls high enough, the pain can't catch up to you. But grief doesn't work like that, sweetheart. Neither does loneliness. You can't outrun yourself forever. A pause, and when Miriam's voice came back, it was softer, more pleading. I miss the little girl who used to curl up in my lap and tell me about her dreams. She wanted to build tree houses for sad people, remember? Places where they could be safe while they figured out how to be happy again. What happened to her, Vivi? When did you stop building tree houses and start building walls? The message ended with a soft beep, leaving silence in its wake. Vivian's hand trembled slightly as she lowered the phone, and Elias pretended not to notice the single tear that escaped down her cheek before she wiped it away with sharp, angry movements. She doesn't understand, Vivian said, her voice tight with emotion she was trying to suppress. She thinks everything can be fixed with warm milk and bedtime stories. Some things are broken beyond repair. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Luna, who had been unusually quiet during the voicemail, looked up from the picture she'd been drawing in her coloring book. My daddy says nothing's ever really broken forever, she said matter-of-factly. Sometimes it just needs different kind of glue. Vivienne let out a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. Different kind of glue? Uh-huh, like when my favorite mug broke, the one with the unicorn that Mommy gave me. Daddy couldn't fix it with regular glue cause the pieces were too small. But then he melted gold crayon wax and used that instead, and now the cracks look like lightning. It's even more beautiful than before. Elias felt his chest tighten with pride and grief in equal measure. He remembered that night. Luna crying over the broken mug. Him desperately trying to figure out how to fix something that seemed impossible. The gold wax had been Maria's idea, whispered to him in a dream, or maybe just pulled from the depths of his love for his daughter. Either way, it had worked. Kintsugi, Vivienne said softly, surprising them both. The Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The philosophy behind it is that breakage and repair are part of an object's history, not something to disguise. Luna nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. See? You do know about different glue. For a moment, Vivienne's carefully constructed mask slipped completely, and Elias saw her as she really was. Not a powerful CEO or a mysterious woman in expensive clothes, but someone who was deeply, profoundly tired. Someone who had been carrying invisible weight for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down. It's okay to let something hurt, he said quietly, echoing her earlier words back to her. Sometimes that's the only way to figure out how to heal it. Vivienne turned to look at him fully for the first time since they'd sat down, her storm-gray eyes searching his face as if trying to determine whether he could be trusted with the truth. What if you've been broken for so long you can't remember what whole felt like? Then maybe you start with being broken but not alone, Elias said. Sometimes that's enough. Outside, other passengers were starting to return to the bus, carrying coffee cups and bags of chips. The driver was doing his pre-departure walk-around, checking tires and mirrors. Soon they'd be back on the road. But something had shifted in the quiet space between the three of them. The pretense of being strangers was dissolving, replaced by something more honest, more fragile. I haven't spoken to my sister in 3 years, Vivienne said suddenly, the words tumbling out as if they'd been held back too long. We had a fight about, it doesn't matter what it was about, pride probably, or fear. She wanted me to be the maid of honor in her wedding, and I said I was too busy. Too many board meetings. Too many international flights. The truth was, I was scared. Of what? Of watching her be happy. Of standing up there in some ridiculous dress pretending I wasn't dying inside with jealousy. She had everything I'd convinced myself I didn't want. Love, family, someone who chose her every day just because of who she was, not what she could do for them. Vivienne's voice grew quieter. The wedding was beautiful. I saw the pictures on social media. She looked radiant, and I wasn't there. Luna had stopped coloring and was listening intently, her 6-year-old mind processing this adult pain with the seriousness it deserved. Did you say you were sorry? It's complicated, sweetheart, Vivienne said gently. No, it's not, Luna replied with the kind of devastating simplicity only children possessed. Sorry is just sorry. Everything else is just scared. The bus driver honked twice, the signal for final boarding. Passengers began climbing back on, but Elias made no move to get Luna settled or gather their things. This moment felt too important to rush, too fragile to break with the mundane business of seatbelts and overhead luggage. "She's right, you know," he said to Vivienne. "About sorry, just being sorry. I spent 2 years after Maria died apologizing to everyone, to Luna for not being enough, to my friends for being a burden, to God for not saving her. But I was really apologizing for still being alive when she wasn't. The apologies I needed to make were different ones." "What kind?" "Sorry for not telling you how beautiful you looked that morning. Sorry for taking for granted that we'd have tomorrow to say all the things we kept putting off. Sorry for not dancing with you in the kitchen when you asked, because I was too tired from work." His voice grew thick with emotion. Those were the apologies that mattered. The ones to her, not to everyone else. Vivienne was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with tears she was no longer trying to hide. "I don't know if she'd forgive me. Sarah, my sister. It's been so long, and I was so cruel." "There's only one way to find out," Elias said gently. The bus driver appeared at their row, looking mildly impatient. "Folks, we need to get moving. Everyone buckled in?" As Elias helped Luna with her seatbelt and Vivienne gathered her composure, he couldn't help but think that maybe getting on the wrong bus had been exactly the right thing to do. Not for the job interview he'd missed, but for this moment of connection, this cracking open of carefully guarded hearts, this recognition that they were all just people trying to figure out how to be human in a world that often felt too big and too hard and too lonely. The bus pulled back onto the highway, carrying them toward whatever came next, but for the first time in longer than he could remember, Elias wasn't afraid of the destination. Sometimes the best journeys were the ones you never planned to take. The bus made an unexpected extended stop in a small town called Brookville, where a mechanical issue required the driver to wait for a replacement part. "Hour-and-a-half delay, folks," he announced with the weary patience of someone who'd dealt with worse. "There's a park across the street if you want to stretch your legs. Just be back when you hear the horn." Luna practically bounced off the bus, her energy finally too much to contain in the cramped seats. The afternoon had turned unexpectedly warm, one of those fall spring days that sometimes appeared in late autumn like a gift. She immediately spotted the playground equipment and turned to Elias with eyes full of hope. "Can I play, Daddy? Please, I've been so good on the bus." "Of course, sweetheart." Elias looked at Vivienne, who was gathering her things with the careful movements of someone not quite sure what came next. "Would you like to join us? It's nice to be outside." Vivienne hesitated, glancing toward the small downtown area visible beyond the park. "I should probably find a coffee shop, make some calls." "The calls will still be there in an hour," Elias said gently, "but Luna's only 6 months." Something in his voice, not pushing, just offering, made Vivienne reconsider. She'd spent so many years scheduling every moment, optimizing every interaction, that the idea of an hour with no agenda felt almost foreign. But also, unexpectedly, appealing. "All right," she said, surprising herself, "but I don't really know how to play." Luna overheard and immediately appointed herself as Vivienne's teacher. "That's okay. Playing is easy. You just have to remember how to be silly." The park was small but well-maintained, with newer equipment and a sandbox that some local kid had clearly been working in earlier. There were the beginnings of an elaborate sandcastle, complete with a moat and several smaller structures. Luna immediately gravitated toward it, her artistic sensibilities recognizing the potential. "Look, Daddy, someone started building but didn't finish. Can we help?" Elias glanced around, making sure no other children were nearby to claim ownership. "I think that would be nice, Luna. Maybe they'll come back and be happy someone cared enough to continue their work." Vivienne found herself drawn to the sandbox despite her expensive clothes and complete lack of experience with playground politics. Luna had already claimed a plastic shovel someone had left behind and was carefully studying the existing architecture. "It needs a tower here," she declared, pointing to a spot that would balance the composition, "and maybe some windows so the people inside don't feel trapped." As Luna began to work, chattering about the imaginary residents of her sandcastle, Vivienne found herself sitting on the edge of the sandbox, initially just watching but gradually being drawn into the project. There was something meditative about the simple task of shaping sand, something that quieted the constant noise in her head. "What do you think lives in there?" Elias asked, settling beside them and beginning work on the moat. His hands were sure and skilled, and Vivienne realized he was applying the same attention to detail he probably brought to his carpentry work. "A queen," Luna said immediately, "but not the mean kind. The kind who takes care of everyone and makes sure no one is lonely." "That sounds like a good queen," Vivienne said softly. "She is. But she's sad sometimes because being queen is hard work and everyone expects her to have all the answers." Luna paused in her digging to look directly at Vivienne. "Do you ever feel like that? Like everyone expects you to be perfect all the time?" The question was so direct, so unexpectedly perceptive that Vivienne felt her breath catch. "Yes," she said quietly. "Yes, I do feel like that sometimes." "That's why she needs the windows," Luna continued, as if this solved everything. "So she can see that other people get sad too, and she doesn't have to carry all the sadness by herself." Elias looked up from the moat he was digging, his expression soft with pride and wonder at his daughter's insight. "Where did you learn to be so wise, little one?" His widened. "From you, Daddy. And from Mommy, before she went to live in the Sky Castle." Luna's voice was matter-of-fact, the way children could be when discussing the incomprehensible. "She told me in a dream that being strong doesn't mean you don't cry. It means you cry and then you help someone else feel better." Vivienne felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time she didn't try to hide them. There was something about this little girl's simple wisdom, her ability to see straight to the heart of things, that made pretense feel not just unnecessary but cruel. "What did you want to be when you were little?" Elias asked Vivienne, continuing to work on the castle's foundation. "Before you became a CEO, what did you dream about?" Vivienne was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "I wanted to build tree houses," she said finally, remembering Miriam's words from the voicemail. "Not just regular tree houses, but special ones, safe places for people who needed somewhere to go when the world got too scary." "Like castles in the air?" Luna asked excitedly. "Exactly like castles in the air," Vivienne smiled, the first truly unguarded smile Elias had seen from her. "I had it all planned out. Different trees for different kinds of sadness. Oak trees for people who missed someone who died. Willow trees for people who felt lonely. Pine trees for people who were scared of the future." "What happened to the tree houses?" Elias asked gently. "Life happened. My parents died when I was 13, and suddenly I had to be practical. Trees don't pay for college or build companies, or take care of yourself when everyone else is gone." Her voice grew quieter. "I told myself I'd build them later, when I had enough money and success to make a difference. But later kept getting pushed further away." "Maybe later is now," Luna said, patting sand into place with serious concentration. "Maybe the tree houses were just practice for bigger castles." Vivienne looked at this little girl, so earnest and hopeful, covered in sand and completely absorbed in her work, and felt something crack open in her chest. Not the painful breaking she'd grown used to, but something softer, like ice melting in spring. "Do you know what I do now, Luna? The work that keeps me too busy for tree houses?" Luna shook her head, still focused on her construction project. "I help companies figure out how to take care of the environment, how to make things without hurting the earth." Vivienne paused, thinking. "I suppose, in a way, I'm still trying to build safe places, just different kinds." "See?" Luna beamed at her. "You never stopped building castles. You just learned how to make them bigger." Elias watched this exchange with something like wonder. In the space of a few hours, his daughter had somehow managed to do what teams of therapists and business advisors probably couldn't. Help Vivienne see herself not as someone who had abandoned her dreams, but as someone who had evolved them. "She has a point," he said. "Maybe the work you're doing now is just a different kind of treehouse, a bigger way of keeping people safe." Vivienne looked at the sandcastle taking shape under their hands, imperfect but beautiful, built by three strangers who were becoming something more. "I haven't felt like I was building something good in a very long time," she admitted. "Most days it just feels like moving money around, making shareholders happy." "That's because you're building for the wrong people," Luna said, with devastating simplicity. "Castles are supposed to be for the people who need them, not the people who already have enough castles." A horn honked in the distance. their bus, signaling 5 minutes until departure. But none of them moved to pack up their tools or brush off the sand. This moment felt too precious to rush, too important to leave unfinished. "What if we did it differently?" Vivienne said suddenly, the words surprising even her. "What if instead of just talking about environmental solutions, we actually built them, created programs that help people like families who need stable housing or communities that don't have access to clean energy?" Elias looked up from the final touches he was adding to the castle's main tower. "That sounds like it would help a lot of people." "It would be risky," Vivienne continued, her mind already working through possibilities. "Shareholders might not understand the long-term vision. It might not be profitable in the traditional sense. But it would be the right kind of profitable," Luna said, as if this were obvious. "The kind that makes people happy instead of just making money." The bus horn sounded again, more insistently this time. Reluctantly, they began to brush sand from their hands and gather their things. But as they stood to leave, Vivienne took one last look at their creation, a lopsided but lovely castle, complete with towers and windows and a carefully constructed moat. "Thank you," she said to both of them, but especially to Luna, "for reminding me that some dreams are worth waiting for, and some are worth changing everything for." As they walked back toward the bus, Luna slipped her sandy hand into Vivienne's perfectly manicured one, leaving small fingerprints on her expensive leather bag. But instead of pulling away, Vivienne held on tighter, as if she were afraid that letting go might make this whole afternoon disappear like something she'd only imagined. Behind them, their sandcastle caught the late afternoon light, its windows glowing golden in the sunset, a temporary but perfect symbol of what three people could build together when they stopped being afraid of getting their hands dirty. Evening had fallen by the time they returned to the highway, the landscape outside transformed into a rolling sea of darkness punctuated by farmhouse lights and the occasional gas station beacon. Most of the other passengers had settled into the drowsy quiet of long-distance travel, some reading, others listening to music through headphones, a few simply staring out windows at the passing night. Luna had exhausted herself with the afternoon's adventure and was curled up again across both seats, using Elias's jacket as a blanket and Vivienne's folded coat as a pillow. The sight of the expensive garment being used for such a humble purpose might have amused Vivienne once, but now it just felt right, as if her priorities were rearranging themselves without her conscious permission. The dim lighting in the bus created an intimate atmosphere, like being in a cocoon moving through the world. Conversations became softer, more confessional. Vivienne found herself studying Elias's profile in the reflected light from the window, noting the lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter and worry in equal measure, the calluses on his hands that told stories of honest work. "Can I tell you something?" she said quietly, not wanting to wake Luna but needing to fill the comfortable silence between them. "Of course." Vivienne was quiet for a moment, gathering courage for words she'd never spoken aloud. "I haven't had a real conversation with anyone in months, maybe years. Everything in my world is scheduled, scripted, designed to accomplish something. Even my friendships are strategic alliances." "That sounds exhausting." "It is." She turned slightly in her seat to face him better. "Do you know what I did last Tuesday? I had lunch with a woman I've known for 15 years. Went to business school together, served on boards together, been to each other's major life events. And halfway through the meal, I realized I had no idea if she was happy. We talked for 2 hours about market trends and regulatory changes and mutual acquaintances, but I couldn't have told you if she was in love or heartbroken or desperately lonely." Elias nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. "After Maria died, I went through a period where every conversation felt like performance art. People would ask how I was doing, but they wanted the sanitized version. We're managing, taking it one day at a time. Luna's being so brave. The truth felt too big, too messy for casual conversation." "What was the truth?" He considered this, his fingers absently stroking Luna's hair as she slept. "That some days I was so angry at her for leaving that I could barely breathe. That I would wake up reaching for her and the absence felt like falling off a cliff, every single morning. That I was terrified I was going to screw up Luna so badly she'd spend her whole life in therapy trying to undo the damage I was doing. But look at her," Vivienne said softly, gesturing at the sleeping child. "She's incredible, wise and kind and so full of love. You didn't screw her up. You're raising someone extraordinary. Most days I feel like I'm just trying not to drown while teaching her how to swim." He smiled ruefully. "The irony is that she's actually teaching me most of the time." Like today, with the sand castle and the tree houses and the different kinds of glue. Sometimes I think she understands life better at 6 than I do at 31. Vivienne was quiet for a long moment, watching Luna's peaceful face in the dim light. "I've never wanted children," she said finally. "Always told myself it was because I was too focused on my career, too ambitious to make that kind of sacrifice. But the truth is, I was terrified I'd be like my parents." "What were they like?" "Brilliant, successful, completely absorbed in their own work." Vivienne's voice grew distant with memory. "They loved me, I think, in their way. But they loved their research more. Climate science was their passion, their calling. They would disappear for months at a time, studying ice cores in Antarctica or coral bleaching in the Pacific. Even when they were home, they weren't really present." "Is that how you got into environmental work?" Vivienne nodded. "I thought if I could build something big enough, important enough, maybe I'd finally understand what was worth sacrificing everything for. Maybe I'd feel that kind of passion they had for their work." She paused. "But passion without connection is just obsession. And obsession is a very lonely way to live." "What happened to them?" "Plane crash in Alaska. They were studying the effects of warming temperatures on permafrost. The weather turned bad, and the pilot tried to land anyway rather than turn back." Vivienne's voice was carefully controlled, but Elias could hear the old pain underneath. "I was away at boarding school. I didn't even know they were gone for 3 days, until the headmaster called me into his office." "How old were you?" 13. Old enough to understand that I was completely alone, young enough to believe it was somehow my fault." She looked out the window at the passing darkness. "That's when Miriam came. My parents, research assistant. She could have put me in foster care, gone on with her own life. Instead, she moved into our house and raised me like I was her own daughter. She sounds wonderful. She is. Vivienne's voice grew thick with emotion. "But I was so angry at everyone. My parents for leaving, God for taking them, Miriam for trying to replace them. I made her life hell for years. Pushed and pushed, waiting for her to give up on me too. But she didn't. No, she didn't. She just kept loving me, even when I was unlovable. Even when I made it as hard as possible." Vivienne wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "And then I grew up and did exactly what I swore I wouldn't do. I became just like them, so absorbed in my work that I forgot how to connect with people. So afraid of being abandoned that I abandoned everyone first." Elias was quiet for a moment, absorbing the weight of her confession. "It's not too late, you know, to change the pattern. Isn't it? I burned so many bridges, hurt so many people. My sister, Miriam, colleagues who tried to be friends. I don't know how to undo 15 years of emotional damage." "You start with one phone call," he said simply. "One honest conversation, one small act of courage." Vivienne looked at him, this man who had opened his heart to her with such generous honesty, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not the cracking she'd grown accustomed to, but something warmer, like a door opening after being locked for too long. "I don't know how," she admitted. "I've gotten so good at being professional, at keeping everything surface level. I don't know how to be real anymore." "You're being real right now," Elias pointed out. "With me, with Luna. It's not that you've forgotten how. It's that you've been afraid to. What if they don't want to hear from me? What if I've waited too long, hurt them too much? Then at least you'll know you tried." "But, Vivienne," he turned to look at her directly, his eyes serious in the dim light. "People who love you don't usually stop loving you just because you've made mistakes. They just start loving you from a distance, hoping you'll find your way back." She thought about Miriam's voicemail from earlier, the love and frustration mingled in her voice. About Sarah's wedding invitation that she'd declined out of pride and fear. About all the relationships she'd walked away from rather than risk the vulnerability of staying. "I have a confession," Vivienne said suddenly. "What's that?" "I know exactly who you are. I mean, I figured it out this afternoon." She saw his confused expression and continued. "Andre Reyes, the man who was going to interview you, his construction company does contract work for my foundation. We've built 3 community centers together in the past 2 years." Elias stared at her. "You know, Andre, I recommended you for the job," she said quietly. Not directly. I had my assistant call his office after I read your application file. Your work history, the letter of recommendation from your former supervisor, the way you wrote about wanting to build something lasting for Luna. It reminded me of something I'd lost. I don't understand. You reminded me that some people still build things because they love the work, not because they love the profit. That was rare enough that I thought Andre should meet you. She looked down at her hands. I'm sorry you missed the interview because of this bus. Because of me. Elias was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. Then, unexpectedly, he began to laugh. Not bitter or angry, but genuinely amused. So the woman sitting next to me on the wrong bus is the person who got me the interview I missed because I sat next to her on the wrong bus? The irony is not lost on me, Vivienne said dryly. Luna's going to love this story when she's older, Elias said, still grinning. She'll say it was meant to happen exactly this way. Will she be right? Elias looked at Vivienne, really looked at her, seeing not the powerful CEO or the mysterious stranger, but the woman who had shared her deepest fears and regrets, who had built sandcastles and listened to his daughter's wisdom, who had somehow made this terrible day into something approaching miraculous. Yeah, he said softly, I think she will be. Outside, the night rolled past, carrying them toward whatever morning would bring. But inside their small circle of light, two people who had started the day as strangers were discovering that sometimes the best destinations were the ones you never knew you were looking for. Fort Wayne appeared in the distance just after midnight, a sprawl of lights against the darkness that looked smaller and more tired than either Elias or Vivienne had expected. The bus wheezed into the terminal with the exhausted sigh of a vehicle that had traveled too many miles with too many stops, and the driver's voice crackled over the intercom with weary finality. Fort Wayne, Indiana. End of the line, folks. Everyone off, please. Thank you for riding with us and have a safe evening. Elias gently shook Luna awake. Her small face scrunched in sleepy confusion as she tried to remember where they were and why Daddy was making her move when all she wanted to do was keep sleeping. The terminal was nearly empty at this hour. Just a few late-night travelers and a security guard reading a paperback novel behind the information desk. Are we home now, Daddy? Luna asked, rubbing her eyes with small fists. Not home exactly, sweetheart, but we're somewhere safe, Elias said, gathering their few belongings while trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. His phone showed 3 missed calls, all from the same number, and his stomach dropped as he listened to the voicemails. The first message was professional, almost cheerful. Hi, Elias. This is Andre Reyes. I waited for you until about 2:30, but I assume you must have had some kind of emergency. Give me a call when you can, and we'll reschedule. The second, several hours later, was more concerned. Elias, I hope everything's all right. I tried calling a few times. Look, I know these things happen, but I really need to fill this position soon. If you're still interested, please call me back tonight if possible. The third message, left just an hour ago, was gentle but final. Hey, I'm sorry we couldn't connect today. I ended up offering the position to another candidate, but please keep in touch. I really was impressed with your application, and if something else opens up, I'd love to consider you. Take care, and I hope whatever kept you away wasn't too serious. Elias closed his eyes, feeling the weight of another missed opportunity settle on his shoulders like a familiar coat. Luna was watching him with the intuitive concern that children develop when their parents' stability is their world, and he forced a smile for her sake. Everything okay? Vivienne asked quietly. She had been uncharacteristically silent during the bus's final approach, staring out the window with an expression that seemed to be working through some internal calculation. The job's gone, Elias said simply. Andre offered it to someone else. Vivienne's face tightened with something that might have been guilt or anger or both. Because of today. Because you were on the wrong bus. Because I made a mistake, Elias corrected gently. It's not anyone's fault but my own. Luna, who had been listening to this exchange with the seriousness that children reserve for adult problems they don't quite understand, slipped her hand into her father's. It's okay, Daddy. Remember what you told me when my favorite crayon broke? Sometimes things that look like endings are really just beginnings in disguise. Elias felt his throat tighten with love and pride for this little girl who somehow always knew exactly the right thing to say. You're right, Luna. We'll figure something out. They gathered their things and walked toward the terminal exit, the fluorescent lights harsh after the dim intimacy of the bus. Outside, the November air was sharp and cold, carrying the scent of approaching winter. A few taxis waited in the pickup area, and Vivienne seemed to be debating something internal as she pulled out her phone. "Where will you go?" she asked. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" Elias checked his wallet, counting the bills he'd brought for the trip. Enough for one night in a cheap motel, maybe two if they were careful about food. "We'll find something," he said, not wanting to burden her with the details of their financial situation. Vivienne was quiet for a moment, then made what seemed like a sudden decision. "There's a decent hotel about 10 minutes from here, the Hampton Inn. Let me call you a cab." "Vivienne, we can't." "Please," she said, and something in her voice stopped his protest. "Let me do this one small thing, after everything today." Before Elias could argue further, she was already on her phone, first calling a taxi, then another number that she answered with careful professionalism despite the late hour. "Andre, it's Vivienne Hale from the Phoenix Foundation." "Yes, I know it's late. I'm sorry. I'm calling about Elias Moreno, the candidate you interviewed today." "Actually, that's why I'm calling." Elias stared at her, Luna still holding his hand and watching this conversation with fascination. Vivienne had moved a few steps away, but her voice carried in the quiet night air. "He didn't miss the interview by choice, Andre. There was a family emergency, and he ended up having to take care of something urgent with his daughter. No, he's not the kind of person who would make excuses or ask for special treatment, which is exactly why I'm calling instead of him." There was a pause while Andre responded, and Vivienne's expression grew more determined. "I understand you've already filled the position, but I have a proposition for you. The Phoenix Foundation is looking to expand our community building program, affordable housing, sustainable construction techniques, job training for displaced workers. We need someone to head up the project, someone with both the technical skills and the personal integrity to build something that really matters." Another pause, longer this time. Elias felt his heart beating faster, afraid to hope. "The salary would be competitive with what you were offering, plus benefits, plus the opportunity to train a team and really make a difference in people's lives. But more than that, it would be a chance to work with someone who understands what it means to build things that last, because he's been building a life for his daughter with nothing but love and determination." Vivienne looked over at Elias, her expression unreadable in the harsh terminal lighting. "Can you meet us tomorrow morning? Say 9 o'clock at the foundation offices? I think you'll want to hear what we have in mind." She ended the call and walked back to them, just as a taxi pulled up to the curb. "Andre wants to meet with you tomorrow morning," she said, as if offering someone a major life change was the most natural thing in the world. "Vivienne, I don't understand. What just happened?" "What happened," she said, opening the taxi door for Luna, "is that sometimes the universe conspires to put the right people in the right place at exactly the right time, even when they're on the wrong bus." Luna climbed into the taxi with the excited energy of a child who sensed that something important was happening, even if she didn't understand all the details. "Are we having another adventure, Daddy?" Elias looked at Vivienne, this woman who had started the day as a stranger and was now somehow orchestrating possibilities he'd never dared to imagine. "I think we might be, sweetheart." As the taxi pulled away from the terminal, Elias caught a glimpse of Vivienne in the side mirror, standing alone under the harsh lights, already back on her phone making what looked like a long-distance call. He wondered if she was calling Miriam, or her sister Sarah, or someone else who had been waiting for her to find the courage to bridge the gaps she'd spent so many years creating. The hotel room was clean and comfortable, with 2 double beds and a view of the highway they'd traveled. As Luna brushed her teeth and got ready for sleep, chattering excitedly about sandcastles and new friends and tomorrow's possibilities, Elias found himself staring out the window at the lights of this unfamiliar city, trying to process everything that had changed in the space of a single day. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for today, for reminding me that some wrong turns lead to exactly where you're supposed to be. Sleep well. Tomorrow we build something new. Why will be?" For the first time in longer than he could remember, Elias fell asleep, not worried about tomorrow, but excited for it. 3 weeks later, Elias was wiping down tables at Miller's Diner, the breakfast shift winding down into the quiet lull of mid-morning. The job at the Phoenix Foundation had materialized like something from a dream. A real salary, benefits, meaningful work, designing sustainable housing projects for families like his own. But the paperwork was still being processed. The background checks and bureaucratic machinery that turned possibilities into paychecks moving at their own institutional pace. In the meantime, he'd taken this temporary position to keep food on the table and maintain the routine that Luna needed. The work was honest, if not inspiring, and his manager, Betty, had been understanding about his upcoming transition to a position that would actually use his skills. "Order up," called Jim from the kitchen, sliding a plate of eggs and hash browns across the pass-through window. Elias delivered the breakfast to table 6, exchanged pleasantries with Mrs. Chen about her grandson's college applications, and returned to his cleaning routine. The diner was nearly empty now, just a few regulars nursing coffee and reading newspapers, the comfortable silence of people who had nowhere urgent to be. His friend Marcus burst through the front door like he was carrying urgent news, his phone held out in front of him with the excitement of someone who discovered something extraordinary. "Dude, you have got to read this," Marcus said without preamble, sliding into a booth and gesturing for Elias to join him. "It's all over social media, this blog post that's going completely viral." "Marcus, I'm working." "Betty won't care. Trust me, you need to see this." Marcus's eyes were bright, with the kind of excitement that suggested he'd found something genuinely meaningful. "It's called The Quietest Hero on the Bus, and I swear to God it sounds exactly like you." Elias felt something shift in his chest, a recognition before understanding. He sat down across from Marcus, who was already scrolling to find the post on his phone. "Listen to this," Marcus began, his voice taking on the rhythm of someone reading something that had moved them. "I want to tell you about a man I met on a bus. I don't know his last name, and I'll probably never see him again, but he changed something fundamental about how I see the world." The words washed over Elias with a strange sensation of hearing his own life reflected back to him through someone else's eyes. Vivienne. It had to be Vivienne, though the post was published anonymously on a platform called Letters to Strangers, had captured details from their journey with an intimacy that made his chest tight with emotion. He was traveling with his 6-year-old daughter, a little girl with eyes full of ancient wisdom and a heart big enough to shelter the world. She drew pictures for a stranger who didn't deserve her kindness, and offered insights that cut straight through years of carefully constructed emotional armor. The man, her father, had gotten on the wrong bus while trying to make it to a job interview that could have changed their lives. Instead of raging at the mistake or taking his frustration out on those around him, he turned it into an adventure for his daughter. He made sure she felt safe and loved even while his own world was falling apart. Marcus continued reading, his voice growing softer as the post delved deeper into observations that felt too intimate, too specific to be about anyone else. I watched him comfort his daughter when she was scared, encourage her creativity, listen to her with the kind of attention most adults reserve for very important people. I watched him carry invisible weight with such grace that you'd never know he was struggling unless you knew what to look for. He told me about losing his wife, about working multiple jobs to support his daughter, about dreams deferred but not abandoned. He spoke about these things without self-pity or bitterness, as if pain was simply another weather pattern to move through with dignity. The post went on to describe their conversation about building things that last, about Luna's wisdom regarding different kinds of glue, about the sandcastle they'd constructed together during their unexpected layover. Every detail was accurate, but filtered through Vivienne's perspective in a way that made Elias see himself differently, not as someone barely keeping his head above water, but as someone who had chosen to swim with purpose despite the current. There's a kind of heroism that doesn't make headlines or win awards. It's the heroism of showing up every day for the people who need you, of finding hope in hopeless situations, of teaching a child that love is more powerful than loss. This man reminded me that strength doesn't always look like conquering. Sometimes it looks like enduring. Sometimes it looks like getting on the wrong bus and turning it into exactly the right journey. Marcus finished reading and looked up at Elias with something like awe. "Tell me, that's not about you." Elias was quiet for a long moment, processing the strange experience of seeing himself through Vivienne's eyes. The person she described felt both intimately familiar and somehow larger than life, as if she'd seen qualities in him that he'd never recognized in himself. "Yeah," he said finally, "I think it might be. Dude, this thing has like 50,000 shares already. People are crying in the comments. Someone started a whole thread about quiet heroes they've known. It's beautiful." Elias pulled out his own phone and found the post, scrolling through comments that ranged from tears emoji reactions to long, personal stories inspired by Vivienne's words. People were sharing their own encounters with everyday heroes, their own moments of unexpected grace, their own wrong buses that had led to right destinations. One comment in particular caught his attention. "This made me call my estranged brother after 3 years of stubborn silence." Sometimes it takes a stranger's story to remind you what really matters. Thank you for sharing this. Another, "I'm a single mom working 2 jobs and feeling like I'm failing at everything." Reading about this father reminded me that love is enough, even when it doesn't feel like enough. Especially then. The post had touched something universal, some shared human experience of struggle and grace that resonated across the digital divide. Vivienne had somehow transformed their chance encounter into something larger, a reminder that heroism often wore work boots and worried about rent and got on wrong buses while trying to build better lives for the people they loved. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, though he suspected he knew who it was. "Did you see it? I hope it was okay to share our story." The world needs more reminders that quiet strength is still strength. V. Elias stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "It was beautiful. Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me." Her response came quickly. "Thank you for letting yourself be seen. It changed everything." Betty appeared at his table, coffee pot in hand and a knowing smile on her face. "You look like a man who just got some good news." "Something like that," Elias said, still processing the surreal experience of becoming an internet sensation for simply being himself. "Well, whatever it is, it suits you. You've got that look people get when they realize they're exactly where they're supposed to be." As Marcus continued scrolling through the viral post, reading him fragments of particularly moving comments, Elias found himself thinking about Vivienne, wondering if she'd seen the responses, if she understood the ripple effect of her words, if she was finally ready to make some phone calls of her own. Okay. The post had been her way of reaching out, he realized, not just to share their story, but to test the waters of vulnerability, to see if opening her heart might lead to connection rather than judgment. Looking at the hundreds of comments from people sharing their own stories of quiet heroism and unexpected grace, he thought she had her answer. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was tell the truth about someone else's courage. And sometimes that was exactly the push both of you needed to start building something new. The Phoenix Foundation headquarters occupied 3 floors of a converted warehouse in downtown Fort Wayne, its industrial architecture softened by floor-to-ceiling windows and living walls of green plants that seemed to breathe life into the space. Elias stood in the lobby with Luna, both of them dressed in their best clothes, his one good button-down shirt and her favorite dress with the twirly skirt, feeling simultaneously nervous and hopeful. It had been 2 days since Marcus had shown him the viral blog post, and Vivienne's assistant had called that same afternoon to invite them both to tour the foundation and discuss quote, future possibilities. Luna had been beside herself with excitement at the prospect of seeing the treehouse lady again, though Elias had tried to manage her expectations about what this meeting might or might not mean for their future. Mr. Moreno, a young woman with kind eyes and a tablet tucked under her arm, approached them from the elevator bank. "I'm Sarah Chen, Miss Hale's assistant. She's so excited to see you both again." As they rode the elevator to the 3rd floor, Luna pressed her face against the glass wall, watching the city spread out below them. "It's like being in a castle in the clouds," she breathed, and Elias felt his chest tighten with love and hope in equal measure. The elevator doors opened onto an open-concept office space that somehow managed to feel both professional and welcoming. Natural light streamed through enormous windows, and everywhere Elias looked, he saw evidence of the foundation's work, photographs of community gardens in Detroit, architectural models of affordable housing projects, children's artwork from environmental education programs. But his attention was immediately drawn to the woman standing near the far window, silhouetted against the afternoon light. Vivienne had her back to them, speaking quietly on her phone. But even from across the room, Elias could sense something different about her, a looseness in her shoulders, a warmth in her voice that hadn't been there on the bus. "Vivienne!" Luna broke free from Elias's hand and ran across the open space with the kind of unrestrained joy that only 6-year-olds possessed. "We came to see your castle." Vivienne turned, ending her call mid-sentence, and her face transformed into something Elias had never seen before: pure, unguarded happiness. She knelt down to Luna's level, accepting the enthusiastic hug with the kind of natural grace that suggested she'd been waiting for this moment. "Luna, you look beautiful, sweetheart. And this is definitely a castle of sorts, isn't it?" "It's the best kind," Luna said solemnly. "The kind where people work together to help other people. That's what real queens do." Over Luna's head, Vivienne's eyes met Elias's, and he saw something there that made his breath catch: gratitude and affection, and something deeper that he wasn't quite ready to name. "Hello, Elias," she said softly, rising to her full height but keeping one hand on Luna's shoulder. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting us. This place is incredible." And it was. As Sarah Chen led them on a tour of the facilities, Elias found himself genuinely impressed by the scope and thoughtfulness of the Foundation's work. There were architects collaborating with community organizers, engineers working alongside social workers, programs that addressed not just environmental sustainability but social equity and economic opportunity. "This is where you'd be working," Sarah said, leading them into a bright conference room where several people were gathered around architectural drawings and planning documents. "Our new community building initiative: affordable housing, job training, sustainable construction techniques." A familiar voice called his name, and Elias turned to see Andre Reyes standing up from the conference table, a wide smile on his weathered face. "Elias, good to see you, son. Ready to talk about building something that really matters?" The next hour passed in a blur of introductions, project descriptions, and possibilities that seemed almost too good to be true. The position wasn't just a job. It was a chance to use his skills in service of something larger, to design and build homes for families like his own, to train other displaced workers in sustainable construction techniques. While the adults talked, Luna had claimed a corner of the conference room and was drawing with crayons Sarah had provided, her tongue poking out in concentration as she worked on what appeared to be an elaborate architectural plan. "What are you building there, sweetheart?" Vivienne asked during a break in the planning discussion. "It's a new kind of castle," Luna explained seriously. "See, it has lots of windows like we talked about, but also bridges, so the people in different towers can visit each other and no one has to be lonely." Vivienne knelt beside Luna's drawing, studying it with the same attention she'd given to the architectural plans they'd been reviewing. "These bridges are beautiful, Luna. How did you know exactly what we needed?" "Because," Luna said with the matter-of-fact wisdom that continued to amaze all the adults in her life, "castles are only as good as the people inside them, and people are only as good as the connections they make." Elias looked around the conference room, at Andre nodding approvingly over construction timelines, at Sarah making notes about community outreach programs, at Vivienne listening to his daughter with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for board presentations, and felt something settle in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. This was what belonging felt like. "There's something else," Vivienne said, addressing the group but looking directly at Elias. "I wanted you all to know that the viral blog post about everyday heroes, the one that's been shared over 100,000 times now, it was about Elias and Luna." The room went quiet, and Elias felt heat rise in his cheeks. But instead of the awkward attention he'd expected, he saw recognition and respect on the faces around him. "I read that," Andre said quietly. "Made me think about my own father, working construction to put food on our table. There's honor in that kind of work, that kind of dedication." "The post has generated over $50,000 in donations to our community building fund," Vivienne continued. "People were so moved by the story that they wanted to contribute to programs that support families like yours. So in a very real sense, Elias, your story is already helping to build the kind of community you dreamed about." Elias felt his throat tighten with emotion he wasn't sure how to process. I was just trying to take care of Luna." "And that's exactly why this works," Vivienne said softly. "Because you understand what we're building for. Not for profit margins or tax incentives or good publicity. For families. For children. For people who deserve safe, beautiful places to call home." As the meeting wound down and specific logistics were discussed, start date, salary, benefits, training programs, Elias found himself in quiet conversation with Vivienne near the windows overlooking the city. "And "I called Miriam," she said without preamble. "After I published the blog post, we talked for 3 hours." "How was it?" "Healing, difficult, long overdue." She smiled, and it was different from any expression he'd seen on her face before. Softer, more vulnerable. "I'm flying to see her next weekend. And then I'm going to call Sarah, my sister. I think it's time to apologize properly." "I'm proud of you," Elias said, and meant it. "I'm terrified," Vivienne admitted, "but I'm also excited in a way I hadn't expected. It feels like—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Like I'm finally ready to build bridges instead of walls." Luna appeared beside them, having finished her drawing and ready to share her latest creation. "Look, I drew all of us in the new castle. See? That's Daddy building things, and that's you helping people, and that's me making sure everyone remembers to be happy." In Luna's drawing, 3 figures stood on a bridge connecting 2 castle towers, holding hands under a sky filled with stars and possibilities. It was childish and imperfect and absolutely beautiful, a 6-year-old's vision of what family could look like when it was built on choice rather than obligation. "Can I keep this?" Vivienne asked, and Luna nodded enthusiastically. As they prepared to leave, Elias realized that something fundamental had shifted in how he saw his future. Not just the job, though that was wonderful, but the sense that he was part of something larger, connected to people who understood what it meant to build with purpose. "There's one more thing," Vivienne said as they waited for the elevator. "I wanted to ask, would you and Luna like to have dinner with me tomorrow? Nothing formal, just, I'd like to continue our conversation about castles and bridges and building things that last." Luna answered before Elias could respond, bouncing on her toes with excitement. "Yes, and can we make it a picnic? Those are the best kind of dinners." "A picnic sounds perfect," Vivienne said, laughing at Luna's enthusiasm. As the elevator doors closed and they descended toward the lobby, Elias caught Vivienne's reflection in the polished metal, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked completely, genuinely at peace. Sometimes, he thought, the wrong bus really did take you exactly where you needed to go. 6 months later, on a warm Saturday morning in May, Elias found himself standing at the same Chicago bus terminal where this whole story had begun. But everything was different now. The spring sunshine streaming through the windows, Luna's excited chatter about their weekend adventure, and most importantly, the woman standing beside them who was no longer a stranger but something much more precious. Vivienne looked different too, softer somehow in her weekend clothes. Jeans and a simple sweater instead of the expensive business attire that had been like armor on that rainy autumn day. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and she was laughing at something Luna had said about the pigeons outside, the sound rich and unguarded in a way that still made Elias's chest tight with wonder. "Are you sure this is the right bus this time, Daddy?" Luna asked, bouncing on her toes as she watched the driver check tickets at the gate. She was taller now, her face more confident, the result of 6 months of stability and security that good work and loving community could provide. "Double-checked," Elias said, showing her their tickets to Wisconsin Dells, where they were spending the weekend at a small lakeside cabin. "Though honestly, I'm not sure I'd mind if we got on the wrong one again." "That's because last time led us to Vivienne," Luna said with the matter-of-fact wisdom that had become her trademark. "But this time we already have her, so we can just have a regular adventure." Vivienne knelt down to Luna's level, something that had become as natural as breathing over the past months of shared dinners and weekend outings, and the gradual building of something that looked remarkably like a family. "What kind of adventure are you hoping for this weekend?" she asked. "The kind where we build another sandcastle," Luna said immediately, "but this time on a real beach with real waves, and maybe we can make it big enough that other kids want to help." "That sounds perfect," Vivienne said, meaning it completely. The boarding announcement crackled over the intercom, and they joined the line of weekend travelers, families with coolers and beach bags, couples holding hands, elderly folks with comfortable shoes and patient expressions. Elias noticed how Vivienne no longer held herself apart from crowds, no longer seemed to find other people's casual happiness somehow threatening to her carefully constructed equilibrium. As they settled into their seats, 3 across this time with Luna in the middle, Elias reflected on how much had changed since that accidental journey in November. The job at the Phoenix Foundation had been everything Vivienne had promised, and more. He was designing affordable housing that actually honored the families who would live there, training crews in sustainable building practices, creating something that would last long after he was gone. But more than that, he'd found his place in a community of people who understood that building things meant more than just putting materials together. It meant creating spaces where people could heal, grow, dream about futures that seemed possible instead of impossible. Luna had flourished too, her natural empathy and wisdom finding fertile ground in the Foundation's community programs. She spent afternoons in the children's garden, teaching younger kids about plants and patience, her drawings now covering not just their apartment walls, but several offices at the Foundation, where adults had learned to value a 6-year-old's perspective on complex problems. "Remember when you thought I needed a castle?" Vivienne asked Luna as the bus pulled away from the terminal, Chicago's skyline receding behind them. "You did need one," Luna said seriously. "You just didn't know it yet. But now you have lots of castles. The Foundation castle, and your apartment castle, and the castle you're building with Miriam." Vivienne's relationship with Miriam had indeed become something like a castle, a safe place built on forgiveness and renewed trust. Their weekly phone calls had evolved into monthly visits, and Miriam had become an unofficial grandmother to Luna, teaching her to bake cookies and sharing stories about Vivienne's childhood that made them all laugh until their sides hurt. The reconciliation with Sarah had been harder, more tentative, but equally meaningful. 3 months of careful phone calls had led to a weekend visit that had been awkward and healing in equal measure. Sarah's children had taken to Luna immediately, and watching Vivienne learn to be an aunt had been one of the most beautiful things Elias had ever witnessed. "What about you, Daddy?" Luna asked, interrupting his thoughts. "What kind of adventure do you want?" Elias looked at his daughter, then at Vivienne, then out the window at the countryside rolling past in the golden afternoon light. 6 months ago, he'd been a man desperately trying to hold his life together with determination and love, and not much else. Now he was part of something larger, a community, a purpose, a future that felt solid enough to build dreams on. "I want the kind of adventure where we're all exactly where we're supposed to be," he said finally. Vivienne reached across Luna to take his hand, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "I think we already have that," she said softly. Outside, the landscape had shifted to rolling hills and small towns, the kind of places where people still waved at passing buses, and children played in yards that seemed to stretch forever. Inside their small circle of seats, Luna was already working on a new drawing, this one showing 3 figures standing on a beach, building something together under a sky full of possibilities. "What are you drawing this time?" Vivienne asked. "It's us," Luna said, not looking up from her careful work with the crayons. "But it's also everyone. All the families who are going to live in the houses Daddy builds, and all the people who read your story about heroes, and all the kids who are going to learn that sometimes the best adventures start with getting lost." Elias felt his throat tighten with emotion that was no longer grief, but overwhelming gratitude. Somehow, through a series of mistakes and chances and small acts of courage, they'd built something beautiful. Not just the 3 of them, but the wider community of people who understood that healing happened in connection, that strength could be quiet, that love was indeed a different kind of glue that made broken things more beautiful than they'd ever been whole. The bus hummed along the highway, carrying them toward whatever weekend adventures awaited. But more than that, it was carrying them toward a future that felt full of promise, built on the foundation of a rainy day when 2 strangers had sat beside each other on the wrong bus and discovered that sometimes the best destinations were the ones you never knew you were looking for. Luna finished her drawing and held it up for them to see. In her careful 6-year-old hand, she'd written across the top, "The right bus this time." And looking at the happy faces she'd drawn, the castle they were building together on the beach, the sun shining down on a world full of possibility, Elias knew she was absolutely right. Sometimes you had to get lost to find your way home. And sometimes home wasn't a place at all, but the people who chose to love you exactly as you were, while helping you become exactly who you were meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.